Hello, today we're going to look at cardiovascular disease and the possible treatments for it. The first thing to note is that cardiovascular disease is a non-communicable disease. That means it's a disease that cannot be caught off someone. It's not spread by germs or bacteria, so we call it non-communicable. The second thing is that cardiovascular disease is a disease of the heart and the blood vessels that surround the heart or supply the heart. Now, the treatments that we have fall under three categories, so we're going to look at each one individually in a moment. The first one is the use of drugs, and we're going to look at the use of one particular one. The second one is to use mechanical devices to replace parts of the heart. Sometimes even the whole heart can be replaced with a mechanical device by an artificial heart. The last one is the use of transplants. So actually taking and replacing the heart, or in fact the heart and lungs. That could be anything from replacing a valve all the way up to the heart and all of the lungs. If the condition is so serious that the heart is not working at all, sometimes doctors have to use artificial hearts to keep the patient alive while they wait for a donor. Okay, and that is possible to keep people alive for a while. So we've got the three categories. We've got drugs, mechanical devices, and transplants. The first thing we're going to look at is coronary heart disease and the use of a mechanical device and of drugs as well. So coronary heart disease is disease of the coronary arteries. These are the arteries that supply the heart with blood and therefore with oxygen and glucose. And those are very important. If they get blocked, we can have major trouble. So what we can do is expand a part of one of those coronary arteries, and you can see here, in this case, there is a blockage inside that artery, and it's usually up against the wall of the arteries, and it narrows the space where the blood can flow. And this blockage is actually fatty deposits that are stuck to the side of the wall, and this is linked with having high cholesterol in the diet. So fatty deposits linked to cholesterol. If we have a blockage like this, what's going to happen is there's going to be less blood that's able to flow through those arteries, and those are very important ones because they supply the heart. And if we get a reduction in blood flow, we're going to get less oxygen being supplied to the heart, we're going to get less glucose being supplied to the heart, and that affects the process of respiration, which will release the energy that allows the heart to contract. So this could be very serious, and it could lead to a heart attack. Now, what are the possible treatments for coronary heart disease? Well, the first one is to use something called a stent. So these are the treatments we're going to look at too. And the first one is the use of something called a stent, which is a mechanical device, and it works a little bit like this. What we have is the stent there inserted into the artery. So I'll slice the artery in half so you can see the stent is in black. There's a balloon that can be inflated inside the stent, and that inflates and pushes the stent against the walls of the artery and widens the walls, pushes the fat hard against the walls and makes the artery wider. The stent then has the job of widening the artery, so therefore more blood can flow and get to the heart, supplying the oxygen and the glucose that it needs to keep going. The second method is the use of a type of drugs called statins, and what they do is they reduce the cholesterol in the blood, and once we have those statins, that will slow the growth or slow the rate of growth of those fatty deposits in the coronary arteries. The next thing we're going to look at is when we have a problem with the valves. So here is a diagram of the heart, and you'll remember, if you watch the heart diagram, that the valves are found in between the atria and the ventricles, and they're also found in the blood vessels leaving the heart. So there's a set of valves there and there and there on that diagram. And the blood flows in through the atria like this and out through those major blood vessels. We've labeled all those in another video. And it's very important that that blood is kept going in one direction only. If we were to look at the valves from a top view, they would look a little something like that, and that's where we can find them. We don't need to worry too much about the names, we just need to know where they are and what they do. What are the possible problems with valves? Well, the first thing is that the valve could possibly not open fully and restrict blood flow. So the first one is that the valves don't fully open. Now this can be a problem because if they don't fully open, that means there is a restriction or a slowing of the blood flow. So we get a reduced blood flow, and if we get reduced blood flow from the heart or blood coming out of the heart, there's going to be less oxygen and glucose, and in fact other nutrients as well, getting to the respiring tissues around the body. That means the heart has to work much harder in order to get that blood to the tissues, and that could end up with chest pains because the heart is working so hard to try and get the blood to the tissues. The second problem that we could have is that the valves are leaky. In other words, they're leaking. They don't close properly, and that stops the blood from flowing completely in one direction. Some of it will flow some of it will flow backwards, and that means we won't get the maximum flow to the respiring tissues. And that will lead similarly to a problem we had before. We get less oxygen and glucose to the respiring tissues, and the heart has to work harder, and again that can lead to chest pains. There are treatments that we can use to help solve this problem, and that revolves around replacing the valves. So you can replace one or more of those valves, and there's two types. We can have mechanical valves, artificial ones, we sometimes call those mechanical, or we can have biological ones. And the pig seems to be an animal that has a heart that's very close in structure to the human heart, so pig valves tend to be used. What I'd like to do now is do a quick evaluation of the pros and cons of the different treatments that we've looked at. So in terms of the first one, that's the use of a stent. It's quite a low risk, simple surgery, can often be done in one day. A person can be in and out of hospital in one day. Problem is though, the fat can rebuild. Any surgery could have a possibility of infection, and there could be damage to blood vessels. In terms of using statins, with statins you have to take them every single day for the rest of your life. So that's one of the cons. The next was heart transplants, and that has the obvious benefits of increasing life expectancy and improved quality of life, but we have major surgery, risk of infection or rejection of the heart tissue. You have to wait for a donor, and you have to also take drugs for the rest of your life to suppress the immune system. Anything linked with surgery is going to have a risk of infection. So that's a downside of anything involving surgery. One further thing to highlight there is that when we have drugs to suppress the immune system, that can increase the risk of other infections because you have a weakened immune system which has been weakened so that you don't reject the heart tissue. In terms of artificial valves, again, life expectancy and improved quality of life are both pros, but we have to take drugs to reduce the risk of blood clotting. Anytime blood meets a foreign object or tissue that's not self, it wants to clot, and we have a risk of that when we have artificial valves in the body. And again, we have to take drugs to stop the valves from the blood from clotting and stopping the valves from working. And again, we've got risks from surgery. The last one then is the use of biological valves. Apart from people not wanting to have pig valves inside their bodies, we have the benefits that there's a low risk of clotting because it's actual tissue that we're using. It functions exactly like human valves. The only problem with them is that they need replacing over time. So if they're in the body for a long time, they tend to harden and they might need replacing. So further surgery might be needed. So there we have it, non-communicable disease related to the heart and the pros and cons of the different treatments that might be used to help with the problem. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.